Welcome to another CRO Wisdom Podcast, Rapid Fire Edition with Chad F. Weller. Chad is CRO at PaperClip. He's president at his own company, CF Walter Consulting. Chad's an interesting guy, had a colorful career, mostly in sales. So we're going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about cybersecurity as well. This pod is presented to you by podpar.com. That's my podcasting company. If you want to start your own podcast or be invited to a podcast to monetize, to meet new people, and just to get smarter, you can go to podpar.com. We'll help you scale the unconventional way. Chad, welcome to the pod. Tell me a bit more about yourself and what you're up to nowadays.
Well, sure, Charles. Thanks for inviting me to participate in today's podcast. My background is very interesting. I tell people, I get asked all the time, tell me about yourself. Well, I'm sales, marketing, operations, and consulting. I still maintain a consulting LLC because I did a lot of startup consulting, but my background's 30 years in technology, 25 years in cybersecurity. Did a lot of work in the cybersecurity consulting strategy build out and so on for organizations, building out sales programs, channel programs, comp plans, defining solutions, building messaging. So yeah, well-rounded background. I landed at PaperClip about a year and a half ago. This little company, we're so old, we own the domain name, paperclip.com, but we've been around for about 3 decades and very interesting, unique company. They're behind the scenes, they're an innovations company that services 9 of the top 10 life insurance and annuity organizations out there. And they built their solutions largely from that good old fashioned, listening to their clients, and their clients tell them, hey, can you do this? If you could do this, we would buy it from you, kind of routine. So, and it led to this wild topic of searchable encryption, the ability to search encrypted data, which is where they brought me in. And I've been enjoying it for the last year and a half plus, building out go-to-market strategy as their chief revenue officer.
And what were the highlights of your career, and what did you learn at various points of your career, especially when it got challenging?
Oh, geez. The early days of carrying a sales bag and having to prove yourself out and taking on challenge, you really learn very quickly that you are the accountable party in the conversation. And sometimes that's hard, especially in sales. My sales career goes back to using Rolodexes and index cards and calling out of yellow pages. And we didn't have all the tools we've got today. There's pros and cons to that as well. We'd also have a captive market if you had the right solution at that point. You weren't competing with companies on the other side of the country or across the globe in many cases. So territory management was unique. But so those early days, it was tenacity, knocking on doors, taking no for an answer, and developing your own personal strategy and learning what drives people, and then moving into leadership. That transition, I think I tell people quite often, especially when I'm advising or I'm talking to a class of students at the college level, it's find something you're passionate in and follow the passion. And when you lose that passion, move on. It's usually time. And passion for me, I found myself in technology very quickly. Yes, I've been the CEO of a company. I've been the president of a company. I've been the COO, and now I'm the chief revenue officer. But it was always, what's that next challenge? What's that next drive? Largely because that's where the passion lies. And cybersecurity, it's there's no shortage of jobs in cybersecurity right now, but there is a shortage of creativity and people who are really passionate about solving the challenge.
Right. Usually cybersecurity is not easy to sell, there are more cyber attacks, but it seems that most humans don't really care about defense. They just want to solve once they're under attack. It's like that just on time philosophy. So how do you actually sell a product that has tons of competition and low quote unquote demand from the market?
Yeah, it's the demand is interesting. So I think there's actually high demand for the right solutions and the right messaging. I think as vendors, we've created this. We said for a long time in cybersecurity, it's not if, it's when. It's not if you're going to get breached, it's when you're going to get breached. So that kind of drove to this really dangerous slippery slope that we're in right now, where where we talk about cybersecurity as being the cost of doing business. To me, that's very short-sighted. So you're absolutely right. I think falling into this constant remediation, it's not even a defense posture, it's a remediation posture. Preparing, putting money aside, preparing. That's important. I think it's important to have your incident response plan, but we can't forget that, who is it that's most affected by a cyber breach? It's the end consumer. It is literal trickle down economics at this point, because if you've got a credit card and your account gets breached, and say it's Capital One, and Capital One covers your fraudulent charges on your credit card. Capital One doesn't write a check to cover those charges. They actually spread those costs out, and who's getting burned by those costs are the consumer, and so the consumer is consistently getting burned. I think at this point in credit card, it's higher interest rates, which really hurts those people who carry a balance. Those of us who don't carry a balance, it's not so, we don't get hit so hard. Those who carry a balance are getting double whammies. I mean, they're paying 20, 22, 25% interest right now on credit cards, and so it's trickled down. So I think our mentality of this, it's a cost of doing business, it's going to come back to haunt us. I think we're on the precipice of a cyber revolution from the consumer standpoint. And I'll put it in perspective. I did some research. I've been doing a couple of keynotes, and I did some research. So cybercrime in 2023 exceeded $8 trillion with a T. That's a big number. So my question is how is that not part of the cost of inflation? If inflation on a global economy is 105 trillion, which is according to virtual capitalists, or not inflation, the global economy is 105 trillion. That $8 trillion is 7.6% of the global economy. And it works out at 8.4 billion people. It works out to being about $952 per person as a tax on every living person on the face of the earth. So it's not a cost of doing business. We've got to do better.
Right. And I see a couple of articles that you wrote here on your LinkedIn, the PayPal data breach. Why is it that we don't often notice when we get hacked, or do we just not notice? And indeed, we've been hacked, because as a consumer, I've rarely been affected by these mass breaches. I did get my stuff hacked, for example, my Facebook account and so forth. So why is it that I often don't notice that I've been breached?
Well, we focus, and some of that is changing. There's some changes to breach notification acts and some activities by the Securities Exchange Commission, the SEC, FINRA. Governing bodies are stepping up to really push disclosure of a breach. But whereas consumers, we're not always the front page, whereas the company that is breached is where all the news, that's where the news hits, is XYZ company was breached, Equifax was breached, Sony was breached, Facebook is breached, or Meta is breached. In the Meta breach, when you look at Facebook or even Twitter, for the most part, that's an inconvenience breach to the end consumer. Not necessarily seen, that we don't realize that breach may have impacted our personally identifiable information that eventually leads to a credit card fraud case or a identity theft case down the road. And I tell a story that's based on a real story and this is where it really hits home and you don't hear about it, but I tell a story about an individual who lives in New Jersey and found out there was a warrant for their arrest in Boise, Idaho, because of a hit and run accident. So it cost that individual in New Jersey, it cost them a little over $50,000 to fight the charges of this hit and run accident. That's a problem, and he can't recuperate that. There's no remediation of that. That individual, that was a hard cost to them to fight these charges because they'd never been to Boise. And it all came down to an identity theft situation. Oh, and by the way, that individual had received 5 different breach notification letters over the last 12 months. So which one of those companies was responsible for that identity theft? And this is the challenge where I think as consumers, we kind of look past this. I mean, I actually had my credit card stolen, my credit card information stolen at the same hotel twice while I was staying there. If American Express had FedExed the new credit card to me, before I checked out, it had been compromised again. And the hotel was fighting the fact that the compromise was happening on their systems because they follow all they meet compliance. And it's a crazy world, and something's got to happen. And I think at some point the consumers are starting to get hit. If you look at NIL, name, image, and likeness, that whole thing with athletes, it wasn't necessarily about athletes getting paid. That was an end result. It was about protecting their online image, their cyber self, and their cyber self-worth in the use of video games. So that's actually a little bit of a revolt happening right there to protect their IP, their cyber IP, so that they can monetize it, so that it's now secure. You look at what happened with the actors and the screenplay writers. That strike was about protecting IP and protecting their cyber worth. I think that the younger consumers are becoming more and more adept at what their cyber worth is, and that's where at some point here we're going to get pushback. It's going to happen. It has to.
Right. And in the case of companies, how can they protect themselves, generally speaking?
So from a company standpoint, that is really hard. That's one of the reasons why I joined PaperClip and I moved from the cybersecurity services, the strategy side, where we largely focused on compliance, because compliance is a huge motivator. But compliance is not security, and companies need to realize that compliance, using compliance as your cybersecurity strategy, is like pouring the foundation of your house and doing no more. And moving in, and expecting to live there comfortably. Compliance is that, just the foundation. I've worked on several incident response cases, and all but one, in all but one situation, the company had met compliance. As a matter of fact, one had just been ISO 27001 certified, and they got breached 2 weeks later. And and I got asked by the CEO why, and it was someone I knew. So I'm going to say something really sarcastic, because no, it's who I am. But I got asked by the CEO, how is it possible? We just got our ISO 27001 certification. How could we be breached? And I said, well, I apologize. I forgot to send the threat actors your certification notification, so that they knew that you were untouchable because you were certified. It's like, at the end of the day, a threat actor doesn't care about your certifications, your cybersecurity certifications, or your compliance. As a matter of fact, the threat actors know that you largely follow compliance, and so they know where you've limited your cybersecurity efforts, your cybersecurity approach, and your strategy. So I haven't met a threat actor yet that couldn't read. They can read the same compliance requirements that we're all reading. But so I moved to PaperClip largely because some of it's just good old fashioned. What data do we have? Why do we secure it? Who are our customers? That's who we're responsible to for securing the data. Let's get back to securing the data. It's called data-centric security, as opposed to network-centric security, or application-centric security. It's all important when you look at a layered cybersecurity approach, defense in depth. But at the center of that, at the very beginning of defense in depth, the core is the data that your customers, your employees, and your partners have trusted you with. And that's how we're going to be more secure, is we start there and we get back to good old fashioned fundamentals. And I don't want to make it sound easy, because it's not. It creates a shift. And we have to recognize that data is fluid. Data is not a siloed entity. It is your business today. We are as close to being 100% cyber in our operational structure today as we've ever been in the history of the world. Very little of what we do is brick and mortar anymore. It's all in that cyber realm, and so data is our business, and we've got to build from that standpoint. That's our crown jewel. The threat actors getting in. They're getting past perimeter security and network security. They're getting to the data.
Right. And as the CRO of PaperClip, what are your top goals and priorities this year?
Our top goal right now is we launched our PaperClip Safe, which is a searchable encryption solution. It gives clients the ability to perform queries on encrypted data. We launched that about 1.5 years ago. We're still heavy in the education phase. because as you know, from an engineering standpoint, we were told for many years that you can't search encrypted data. So that became acceptable risk. You know, the data, in order to query it, needed to be in plain text form. Well, that's changing, and so we're in a heavy education. So my short-term goals are really to educate the market, bring awareness around the possibility of being able to search encrypted data without exposing it as plain text throughout the data stack. So that's early goals. Obviously, I've got some sales goals to hit and early adopter goals to hit with new prospects, new clients. We are being a 32-year-old, well, 33-year-old company at this point. We're not looking for venture capital, which is great from a chief revenue officer standpoint. You know, that's not something we're heavily seeking at this point. We're self-sustaining and we're a profitable organization. So great there. But looking at expansion goals, growth goals, different tools to leverage to impact the market. Long-term goal is to get to a market adoption rate that becomes measurable market share. But we're early stage right now. We've got to educate. We've got to really align to the fact that encryption has failed us to this point because it's largely based on static data at rest, or even data in transit, which is data at rest just in a container that moves from one point to the other. But data is a lot more fluid than that. Even our archives are fluid. So, you know, we've got to that short term moving into long term is making sure that people understand that that encryption in use is different than at rest and at transit. Encryption in use is possible, and the implementation is actually a lot simpler than many of the encryption at rest solutions that are out there. So it's a challenge. We work with analysts. We work with people like yourself who invite us to sit in on podcasts, and we bang that drum.
There you go. And on your side, what kind of routine do you keep to be very productive as a CRO in your current?
Oh, you mean how do I best herd cats?
I see some hockey behind you. I see some football. Any physical activity? What do you do to keep yourself energized?
Yeah, so I'm a sports nut. At the basis of a lot of what I do is a lot of sports mentality, team building, team mentality. That comes from my sales leadership background, and I played sports. I think there's some sanity in that. Outside of my golf game, we won't talk about that. There's no sanity in my golf game. That's it's a different animal. But yeah, I mean, from a routine standpoint, I've worked from home for a long time. You've got to set a manageable routine. It's easy when you work from home to work 24/7, to always be available. You've got to set those boundaries. Otherwise, your work-life balance just doesn't exist. And that's its own podcast. We could talk about work-life balance for probably 2 to 3 hours easy. But no, I think I look at you and I, we were talking, my schedule changed a lot because I had a family emergency last week to deal with. So you do a lot of juggling, and fortunately I do have a regimented process to block off time during the week to decompress, to catch up, to really plan my week and to close my week. So usually Mondays and Fridays, I have time set aside. Mondays to make sure that my plan is aligned for this week. My executables are defined. And then Friday is really a time to step back and, okay, did I hit my objectives for the week? What's rolling over? Also, if I'm doing writing, I've got to do content creation. Friday's a good point for me to summarize what I learned this week and what I can apply to any of that content. So I usually block off. I've got 2.5 hours in the morning as I'm looking at my calendar right now on Fridays to do that decompression, and then on Mondays I block off 2 hours in the morning. Try not to start my Mondays with meetings. That throws off my whole week.
Interesting. And Chad, where can we find out more information about you and the company?
Sure. Yeah. So the company is actually easy. We are old enough that we own the domain name. So it is just paperclip.com. And you can go and you can learn all about the company story, the history of the company, the different solutions in the markets that we operate within. Also learn more about PaperClip Safe. And we've got another solution that we're launching here at the beginning of Q2 which is along the lines of electronic signature, e-signature, and simplifying that. And that's a solution that comes from our clients. You can also follow me on LinkedIn, and so it's easy to find. Just Chad Walter. It's my LinkedIn, and then CF Walter is my Twitter, my X handle. So yeah, definitely feel free to connect. And I enjoy communicating with people, sharing thoughts, trying to keep it as non-controversial as possible. But sometimes it's where it goes.